Welcome to Elselah Books podcast. Today, we're diving into the incredible life of Dwight L. Moody. Now, this is a guy who, believe it or not, only had about a fifth grade education. He starts out as this kind of mischievous farm boy and somehow becomes one of the most influential figures of his time. And the crazy part? He pioneered techniques in media and marketing that honestly we still see being used today. So let's kick things off with a quote from Moody himself. It's a really powerful one because it basically splits his life right down the middle. For him, it wasn't one long story. Nope, it was two completely separate lives. The one before this huge spiritual change and the one after. And that moment, that pivot point, that's exactly what we're going to unpack. So how are we going to do that? Well, we've broken it down into 5 key parts. We'll look at his, let's say, wild beginnings. Then we'll get to that one moment that changed everything. After that, we'll dive into the groundbreaking ways he reached people. Think media and marketing before it was a thing. We'll also look at the schools and organizations he built that are still around today. And finally, we'll try to get to know the actual man behind it all. All right, let's jump right in. The story of D.L. Moody, well, it doesn't start where you'd expect, like in a quiet church. Oh no, it starts with this really restless country kid who was way more known for causing trouble and having big dreams than, being holy. To put it lightly, he was a handful. And this little anecdote, it tells you pretty much everything you need to know about him. Picture this. He's just 5 years old, can't pay for a stagecoach ride, so what does he do? He goes and picks a bunch of wildflowers and barters his way on. I mean, come on. That mix of charm and just sheer relentless determination to get what he wanted, that was baked into his DNA from the very beginning. And yeah, that determination, it definitely spilled over into some serious mischief. Get this, one time he got his friends together to intentionally stampede a farmer's cattle just for kicks. And then, the best part, he immediately turns around and pretends he's just an innocent bystander helping to round them all up. Not exactly the resume you'd expect from a future religious icon, right? But, life has a way of humbling you. When that big ambition of his finally took him to the big city, Boston, in 1854, it just slammed into a brick wall. He spent days just walking the streets, trying to find a job, and just got rejected over and over and over. He talked about it later, saying it was just this awful, deep feeling of loneliness, a feeling he said he never, ever forgot. But that feeling of being on the outside looking in, it wasn't going to last forever. Because the place where he finally did get a job, a shoe store in Boston, that's where it happened. His entire life was about to change because of one single quiet conversation. So there's Moody in the back room of the shop, just wrapping up shoes. And his Sunday school teacher, a guy named Edward Kimball, walks in. He just puts a hand on Moody's shoulder and starts talking to him about faith. Kimball himself later said it was a weak plea. He didn't think much of it, but for Moody, that was everything. That was the spark. Right there, in the stockroom of a shoe store, his whole world shifted. And from that moment on, his commitment was just absolute. He actually got pretty successful, became a great shoe salesman in Chicago, making good money. But then he does something pretty radical. He just walks away from it all, gives up a really comfortable income to do mission work full-time. I'm talking treating a solid career for a tiny room and basically living on crackers and cheese. It's a huge change. Okay, so this is where the story gets really interesting. Remember that restless, ambitious kid who stampeded cattle? Well, he took all of that energy, all of that drive, and he just aimed it at his new mission. And in doing so, he basically turned the whole idea of religious outreach completely on its head. I mean, he started thinking on a scale that was just unheard of. At one point in Glasgow, he held an outdoor event for an estimated 30,000 people. Now, you got to remember, this is way before microphones or speakers. This wasn't just a big church service. This was a massive organizational challenge. It was more like putting on a modern-day music festival, honestly. Just look at the comparison. The old way was quiet, formal services in a local church. Moody, he's setting up massive tents and renting huge public halls for citywide events. Instead of ignoring the press, he used newspapers strategically to build buzz. And this is a huge one. He invented something called the inquiry room. It was a special place where, after the big sermon, people could go for a personal one-on-one chat. He had this philosophy he called consecrated common sense, and it's exactly what it sounds like. He mixed his faith with really smart practical strategies. He'd use simple, everyday language that everyone could understand, not complicated jargon. He ran his campaigns like a modern business, and he was brilliant at getting different church groups who didn't always agree to work together for a bigger goal. But here's the thing about Moody. He was a total pragmatist. He knew that the hype and energy from a huge event, well, it fades. For his work to really mean something long-term, he had to build something that would last, something that would still be there long after he was gone. So the big question is, how do you make your impact outlive you? For Moody, the answer was simple. You don't just give people a moment of inspiration. You build actual institutions that can educate them, train them, and equip them for the future. And that's exactly what he did. This is his lasting legacy. He started schools for young women and young men, especially for those who couldn't normally get a higher education. He started what would become the Moody Bible Institute to train people. He even started a publishing company to get books and pamphlets into the hands of everyday people. These were the engines he built to keep the work going. Okay, but to really get the full picture, we have to look past the savvy organizer and the famous preacher. We need to look at the man himself, because he was a guy of really intense conviction, for sure, but also just deep, deep humility. I love this story. So he's about to speak to this huge crowd, and right before, he gets into a big argument with someone and totally loses his temper. Now, most people would just brush it off and go on stage. Not Moody. He walks out there, and the very first thing he says is a public apology for losing his temper. In that era, for a public figure to be that honest and humble, it was just shocking, and it made people connect with him on a whole different level. And that powerful conviction he had, it was with him his whole life, right up to his very last moments. On December 22nd, 1899, he's surrounded by his family, and he suddenly says, "Earth recedes, heaven opens before me." It was like he was seeing something no one else in the room could. His son even thought he was dreaming and tried to wake him up. But Moody's response was so clear. He said, "No, this is no dream. If this is death, it is sweet." And then a little later he says this, "This is my triumph. This is my coronation day. I have been looking forward to it for years." So for him, in his mind, this wasn't a sad ending at all. It was his ultimate victory. So that leaves us with his big question, right? The life of D.L. Moody. This mischievous kid who became this revolutionary figure, it just goes to show how one person's deep conviction can create these massive ripples, changing education, changing media, and changing faith for generations to come. His story really makes you think, what does it actually take to build something that truly lasts? I really recommend you try get this book and read it. Be blessed. Thank you for listening, and do subscribe to our channel for more.